The crystal felt like a frozen blade against my palm, but it wasn't the cold that made my skin crawl. It was the faint, chalky residue clinging to the rim of my 18-year-old scotch. My own daughter Jessamine had just handed it to me with a smile that looked like a jagged wound. "To your retirement, Dad," she had whispered, her voice high and brittle. She didn't know that 3 hours earlier my doctor had given me a final, terrifying mandate. One drop of alcohol while on these new antibiotics, and my heart would simply stop. I stared into the amber liquid, realizing I wasn't holding a toast. I was holding my own funeral. I am Garrison. At 70, I had just walked away from a $31 million empire built on the wreckage of corporate takeovers. I knew how to spot a hostile merger from a mile away, but I never expected the primary predator to be my own flesh and blood. My Myers Park estate was filled with the smell of expensive cigars and the hollow laughter of social climbers. Yet the air felt stagnant, heavy with a humidity that had nothing to do with the North Carolina heat. I set the glass down on the mahogany bar, my heart hammering a rhythmic war drum against my ribs. Minutes later, my son-in-law Sterling approached the counter. He was a man drowning in his own skin, his eyes bloodshot from the stress of a failing architectural firm. Without looking, he grabbed the glass with the specific jagged chip on the rim, my glass. He drained it in one desperate, thirsty gulp. In that moment, the world slowed to a crawl. I watched the liquid vanish down his throat, and I knew the ledger of my family was about to be closed in blood. The ballroom was a theater of my own making, but as I watched Sterling stumble, I felt like a ghost in my own victory lap. Why would a daughter ask for a detailed list of your medical symptoms instead of wishing you a speedy recovery? I recalled our phone call from noon. Jessamine hadn't asked how I felt. She had asked exactly what would happen if I slipped up and drank. Rapid heart rate, respiratory failure, I had told her. Information is power, and in her hands it was a scalpel. "Dad, you've earned this," Jessamine said, reappearing at my side, her knuckles white against her silver tray. She saw the empty glass in Sterling's hand, and her porcelain mask fractured for a microsecond. The realization hit me like a physical blow. She hadn't just ignored my health. She had weaponized the doctor's orders to ensure my death would look like a stubborn old man's final mistake. Have you ever looked at someone you love and realized they were measuring you for a casket? Before we go further into the shadows of this house, I need you to do something for me. If you believe that blood should be thicker than greed, hit the like button and subscribe. It helps me tell these stories for those who can't speak for themselves. And tell me in the comments, at what price does a daughter's love turn into a death warrant? Sterling hit the marble floor with a heavy, sickening thud. The music died, replaced by the stinging scent of panic and spilled whiskey. Jessamine's scream was a visceral shock, the sound of a woman realizing her trap had claimed her partner instead of her victim. "Sterling, no!" she wailed, but her eyes were darting toward me, checking to see if I had seen the vial. I didn't move. I shifted from father to predator, deconstructing her performance with the same clinical detachment I used to audit a failing firm. I needed to find Briar, my 10-year-old granddaughter. I slipped away from the toxic, perfumed heat of the main hall and retreated to the library. The library was a cavern of shadows. Briar was tucked into a leather armchair, her small frame nearly invisible. She was clutching a thick black sketchbook, her knuckles white. "The quiet is safer, Grandpa," she whispered. When she showed me her drawings, dark, towering figures with scribbled-out eyes standing over a trembling cub, I realized the cub wasn't in a cage. The cub was the cage. I left her there, my hands balled into fists. I realized then that I had spent 40 years reading balance sheets while missing the most significant deficit in my own home. Loneliness makes dangerous choices feel reasonable, but greed makes them inevitable. The hospital smelled of industrial wax and the metallic tang of hospital air. I watched Jessamine in the waiting room. Her grief was a curated exhibit for the security cameras. Her mascara remained pristine. No real tears had fallen. When the doctor emerged to announce they had found traces of ricin in Sterling's system, Jessamine's first question wasn't about his survival. Did they test any other surfaces? Any other glasses?" she asked, her voice tight with a sharp, predatory fear. She was checking the perimeter of her crime. I drove back to the estate in the middle of the night, the rain drumming a rhythmic cadence on the roof of my Jaguar. I had a 3-hour window while she played the grieving wife. I entered the dark, silent house and headed straight for the mahogany bar. I found the chipped glass. I sealed it in a Ziploc bag, the snap of the plastic sounding like a cell door locking shut. I retreated to my study and began a digital descent into the genealogy of greed. I bypassed standard credit blocks, peeling back the layers of their lives. What I found was a $650,000 sinkhole. Sterling had been gambling with my gifts, and a foreclosure notice for their home was sitting in the digital queue. My death was their only liquidation event. At 6 a.m., my private investigator sent the final blow, a $500,000 life insurance policy taken out in my name 6 months ago. The signature on the bottom was a perfect imitation of my own. Jessamine had spent months practicing how to become me on paper so she could kill me in reality. "Is the air getting thin for you yet, Jessamine?" I whispered to the empty room. I called Corbin Mercer, my longtime counsel. "I want the wall higher, Corbin," I said. We moved $6 million, the exact sum she had already spent in her head, into an ironclad trust she could never touch. In the boardroom, we call this a poison pill. In my family, the poison was already in the glass. I spent the next day installing military-grade surveillance throughout the house. I wanted to see the snakes in high definition. When Jessamine arrived the next morning, thinking she was coming to have me sign a power of attorney to lock me in a care facility, she walked directly into the center of the stage. She pushed the papers toward me. "Just sign here, Dad. You're so confused lately. Let me handle the big numbers." I looked at the pen. I looked at her. "I've dismantled billion-dollar corporations, Jessamine. Did you think I wouldn't see the rust on your soul?" The front door chimes shattered the silence. Detective Morrison stepped into the room, placing the bagged, chipped glass on the table alongside the toxicology report. Jessamine's face shifted from triumphant greed to a paralyzing gray terror. "You shouldn't have left your DNA on the rim, Jessamine," Morrison said. As they led her away in handcuffs, the metallic click was the most beautiful sound I had heard in 40 years. But the war wasn't over. Sterling, clinging to life in the ICU, had one final jagged gift for me. He called me to his bedside, his breath smelling of decay and bitter spite. "I took your wife right under your nose, Garrison," he hissed. "Catherine didn't die of cancer. I poisoned her for 6 months to make Jessamine dependent on me. I built this marriage on her corpse." I felt the world tilt. 19 years of mourning a tragedy, only to find out it was a slow-motion execution. I didn't wait for permission. I ordered the exhumation of my wife's body. The Charlotte fog clung to the headstones like a cold, wet shroud. I stood at the cemetery watching the yellow backhoe position itself over the Garrison family plot. Thud, scoop, repeat. The sound of a past being unmade. When the silver-gray casket was hoisted into the morning light, I didn't flinch. The lab results were a leaden weight. Chronic arsenic poisoning. Sterling hadn't just killed her, he had tortured her to isolate her from me. How do you breathe when you find out your life's greatest tragedy was actually a man's afternoon project? I returned to the Vance household to collect Briar. In her room, I found a hidden diary under a loose floorboard. "Daddy hurt my arm for spilling juice. Mommy said if we don't get Grandpa's money, it will get worse." The rage I felt was surgical. I didn't just want them in prison. I wanted them erased from her soul. I took Briar to my estate and locked the gates. I filed for emergency sole custody using the diary and the toxicology reports as my primary blades. The final trial was a media circus, but inside the courtroom, it was a morgue. Sterling was sentenced to life without parole. Jessamine, having traded financial secrets for a lighter load, received 8 years. As she was led away, she screamed my name, clawing at the air. "It's your money that put me here. It's only fair you use it to get me out." Her greed was a terminal disease that even a jumpsuit couldn't cure. I walked out of that courthouse and never looked back. I turned my estate into the Catherine Garrison Advocacy Foundation. My home would no longer be a fortress of isolation, but a sanctuary for the exploited. I liquidated every remaining Garrison family holding. There's no private stock left for vultures. Now I sit in my garden with Briar. She no longer carries a black marker. She carries a palette of vibrant ambers and golds. She's painting a lion, a guardian, she calls it. He's making sure the thorns don't come back, Grandpa. Wealth is a blunt instrument in the wrong hands, but in the right ones, it's a lighthouse. I am 71 years old, and for the first time, the ledger of my life is perfectly balanced. I didn't just survive a hostile takeover. I reclaimed the right to be a human being. Before you leave this story, remember, desire whispers louder than guilt, but the truth eventually screams. If this journey moved you, please like and subscribe to stay tuned for more narratives of justice. Tell me, if you found out your entire life was built on a lie, would you have the courage to burn it down and start over? I'll be in the comments waiting for your answer. The sun is setting over Myers Park, and for the first time in my life, I'm not looking at the door to see who is coming. I'm looking at the table to see who stayed.